Hey friends, it's time to talk about the Guardian Druid in the War Within. And I just want to say, out of the gates, I have a lot of thoughts and feelings that I need to share about this class, so I apologize if this video gets a little bit long-winded or ranty. I'm going to do my best to be concise and constructive with my feedback, but I have some things to say. First of all, I want to preface this by saying that overall, having played Druid in quite a few dungeons now, it feels okay. It doesn't feel as bad as it has in some past seasons, and it doesn't feel as good as it did in Season 2 of Dragonflight. It feels very okay, very like middle of the pack as far as tank power goes. It doesn't feel as sturdy as Prot Warrior or Brewmaster, but it doesn't feel as crunchy as Paladin or Vengeance do right now. I think it feels very, very okay. The toolkit is still on the more basic side, which I think is fine. Druid is probably still the tank that I would recommend to someone who wants to get into tanking and has never done it before and really wants to be able to focus on learning about the role, about how to pull a dungeon, about how to position and move around and use CC and crowd control and everything effectively. It is going to feel familiar on that level, but overall I think the fact that we saw changes and it's still in the state that it's in is disappointing, and I think the hero talent trees are kind of a mixed bag as well. But like the other tanks, we're going to talk about the baseline changes, we'll talk about the talents, both the class and spec tree, we'll talk about both hero talent trees, and we'll talk about the tier set, and then lastly a little bit more on how it plays and how it actually feels to play it in content that is somewhat challenging. Overall, nothing about the baseline toolkit of Guardian has really changed. You still have Mangle that you're going to want to use on cooldown, you have Thrash that you're going to want to use on cooldown, and then you have Moonfire and Swipe, which you can use as filler abilities. You still have Iron Fur and Frenzied Regen to spend your Rage on for defense. You still have Maul to spend your Rage on offensively. Your cooldowns are the same. Guardian is going to feel like pretty much the same class with just a little bit of added flavor and flair from the hero talents. So let's move into the talent trees. Now looking at the class tree, I do want to give a little bit of credit to Blizzard here, because compared to the absolute mess that we have of a class tree in Dragonflight, this is actually an improvement. There are still a lot of issues with it that I want to talk about, but overall I have to say it is not as bad as what we have had in the past. First of all, Lakara's Teachings is now a 2-point talent, down from 3. I do not understand why it is still a 3-point talent to this day in Dragonflight. That is an absolute abomination, the fact that there's a 3-point talent still in the game. But it is now down to a 2-point talent, and honestly getting 6% of a stat from 2 points feels okay. One of the problems that I have is that all of the talents going into your capstone area are gated by these 2-point talents, and even if they feel good, the fact that you have no other pathing options but to go through 2-point talents just limits what you're able to do with your flexibility in the capstone area. For example, if you want to run Well-Honed Instincts, which I think you want to run in any challenging content, then you have to either choose between getting into Heart of the Wild or being able to get even down into Lore of the Grove. This is a mess. These do not all need to be 2-point talents. I think Instincts of the Claw and Lore of the Grove could both be 1-point talents, and I think there could be a pathing option straight down to Well-Honed Instincts and straight down to Nature's Vigil, so that you actually have those as viable options within the tree. In addition to that, there are still other 2-point talents up here that block your progress down the tree. You also have a lot of talents that branch off into the side and don't actually lead anywhere, meaning that if you want to take Feline Swiftness, which is 15% movement speed and is actually really nice to have, you have to spend a talent point that doesn't actually unlock anything else in the tree. There are still wasted talent points that you have to take in the tree to get to other useful talent points. If you want to take Remove Corruption, you still have to take Rejuvenation. You are never going to use Rejuvenation in combat as a Guardian Druid. Why do we have to spend a talent point on an ability that we're never going to use to get abilities that we want to use? It's the same thing with Rake. There is a situation where you may actually find yourself using Rake, so maybe this is not the best example, but having to take Rejuvenation to get to Remove Corruption, to spend a talent point on it, just feels incredibly bad. One thing that we need to note is that Astral Influence no longer increases the range of your abilities. It is now specific to spells. This is something that Blizzard has been nerfing universally for all classes that used to have these kind of range extender talents. These have all been removed across all melee classes, so now everyone has been returned to a baseline of 5 yards. This is probably okay for the state of the game in general, but I think Blizzard, if they're going to do this, they need to be careful about what the size of hitboxes are. One of the reasons these talents felt so great is because sometimes mobs have a hitbox that is much smaller than it should be, and you have to choose between either being able to play the game or keep your character alive, and that's never a decision that you should be forcing your players to make on a regular basis in an encounter. The other problem that I have with the class tree is that there's just a general bloat about it. If you want to get into Typhoon, you're having to give up something like Lore of the Grove, or Improved Stampeding Roar, or Well-Honed Instincts, and honestly, like, there's no reason that it should be that hard to get a core utility ability like Typhoon that Guardian has been able to get forever. Having to give up through point talents to get something like Typhoon feels even worse. If you need to take your Soothe, you are forced to path through Ursol's Vortex or Mass Entanglement, even if they are not going to be useful in the encounter that you're doing. There is a talent here called Ursol's Spirit, which again, there's 2 talents here that don't offer you any further pathing down the tree. By the way, Hibernate also doesn't offer you any further pathing down the tree. There's just way too many of these talents that you may want to talent into situationally that don't actually unlock anything further in the tree. Like, I don't understand that design decision. But going back to Ursol's Spirit, this increases your stamina in bear form by 10%. The problem with this is that they actually nerfed the baseline stamina that you get in bear form. They just pulled 10% out and threw it in the talent tree for no reason. This is exactly the kind of thing that felt really bad about some of the talent trees going into Dragonflight, where they took core passives or just core active abilities and then forced you to spend talent points on them, often in situations where you don't want to be spending a talent point at this specific junction on the tree. So overall, while I think the Druid class tree is technically improved from where it was in Dragonflight, I think this is still a mess that honestly needs a total redesign from the ground up. This idea of having like a Feral section and then a Guardian section and then a Resto section and then a Balance section, it just doesn't work. Unless they're going to give Druids 10 more talent points to spend here, there is no reason for them to have an entire extra section of the tree compared to every other class. And there's also no reason for everything to be this segmented and for there to be this general lack of crossover. Overall, I'm still very frustrated with how the talent tree feels and with how it feels to spend a lot of these points. Even if they are good talents, just the layout and the design of the tree continues to be a point of frustration heading into the War Within. Moving over to the Spec tree, this is another source of frustration for me. This has basically received no changes at all, and this was already like the worst tank Spec tree, I think. I don't even know where to start with this one. There are some really good talents in the Guardian tree, so I want to kind of highlight those and shout them out, right? After the Wildfire continues to be really good passive healing for your party, although compared to health pools and the sizes that they have in the War Within versus Dragonflight, it's losing a lot of passive power. Dream of Cenarius is still a great talent that allows you to do a lot of off healing. Some of the cooldowns that are available to Guardian in Incarnation and Rage of the Sleeper feel incredible to press as buttons, but overall, this tree is still just a mess. Why does Berserk have to be separated into 3 talents with another separate talent point for Incarnation? These should be combined into 1 talent point that's up here in the tree, and then you honestly could just bake the Rage reduction into the baseline talent. That would do a lot for the tree, honestly, in my opinion. In addition to that, you can see right here, I've kind of built out a talent set that is focused on getting as much as we can out of the Elune's chosen hero talents. But the problem is, this basically locks us out of many really important talents that you would want to have in the baseline kit as a Guardian Druid. This locks us out of even being able to consider taking Earth Warden. I guess you could drop like these talents here to get to it, but you really want to be taking Circle of Life and Death because you want to be getting more Moonfire damage. You have all these other talents above Moonfire. Getting it to tick faster is really important. You also have, I mean, we'll talk about this later, but you have an ability that turns Thrash into arcane damage, so getting more ticks on that is really important for feeding into this Elune's Chosen cycle. But overall, like, we're locked out of so many important talents on the left side of the tree. You have to choose between basically being an Arcane Bear or being a Thrash Bear, but then you kind of want both if you're really going to optimize everything out of Elune's Chosen. Just the choices that you're forced to make because of how spread out and bloated this talent tree is feels really, really bad. It's especially egregious that there are just so many talents in the capstone area. They need to reduce the amount of talent choices here significantly, and then kind of redesign it so that it's easier to get more of the talents that you actually want to get. I could go on and on and on about this, but I am extremely disappointed that we haven't seen any changes to the Guardian tree, and I would like to see, if not a complete overhaul, at least a serious combination of many of these talents so that it's possible to actually create a flexible playstyle and a flexible talent build that you can use in different forms of content. The Guardian tree is a mess, and while the result can be powerful, as we've seen in Season 2 of Dragonflight, and as we may see in one of the seasons of The War Within, it just feels bad when you look at so much of your toolkit being left on the table when other classes are able to get whatever they want from their talent tree at very low cost. Okay, let's talk about the hero talents. I have had probably as much fun playing with Elune's Chosen as I have with any of the other talent trees for other classes and other specs. The fact that they've taken Lunar Beam from being a main talent that wasn't used for what feels like decades and turned it into something that is a core part of your toolkit, a core defensive and offensive ability, actually feels really, really good. So let's talk about what this does for Lunar Beam. First of all, it just makes it a viable option. Lunar Beam now causes you to leech life equal to 10% of all damage dealt to enemies within the beam. So this is not only damage that the beam does, it's all of the damage that you do while you have enemies inside of it. And then the capstone talent further increases the power of Boundless Moonlight. Lunar Beam increases mastery by an additional 10%, deals 30% increased damage, and lasts 3 seconds longer. You have significant uptime on Lunar Beam while you're playing Elune's Chosen, and it turns it into a really powerful ability. In addition to that, with this ability within the tree, Lunation, your arcane abilities reduce the cooldown of Lunar Beam by 3 seconds. That's going to be every time you Moonfire, you're reducing the cooldown of this by 3 seconds. In addition to that, if you take Lunar Calling on the other side of the talent tree here, Thrash now deals arcane damage, and its damage is increased by 12%. So every time you Moonfire and every time you Thrash, you'll be reducing the cooldown of Lunar Beam by 3 seconds. This is incredibly powerful cooldown reduction on an ability that's already just a minute cooldown baseline. I mean, if you are intentional about using Thrash and Moonfire, and especially during your incarnation windows, you can get a sub 30-second cooldown on Lunar Beam. And it's an incredibly powerful ability with how it's being buffed throughout this tree. Overall, I have loved playing with the Elune's Chosen talent, with Lunar Beam as being a functional part of the toolkit, and just being a full-on Arcane Bear. This has been a really fun playstyle. It's been the one thing that's made me keep Druid in consideration as a possible main character for me heading into the War Within. Elune's Chosen, fantastic. On the other hand, Druid of the Claw, I have been largely underwhelmed and disappointed by this one. Let's kind of talk about how it plays and what's going on here. So Ravage, your auto attacks have a chance to make your next Maul, become Ravage. Ravage slashes through your target in a white arc, dealing a lot of physical damage to your target, and half of that physical damage to all other enemies in front of you. This does big damage when it procs. The problem is it is a proc based on your auto attacks. You don't really have any control over when Ravage becomes available to you. With the capstone, you can get a little bit more control, or at least a little bit more opportunity to use this button, because this makes it that during Berserk or Incarnation, which you'll probably be playing at all times in the War Within, Mingle, Swipe, and Thrash have a 25% chance to make your next Maul become Ravage. You actually get quite a few Ravages off during your Incarn window, but I think just kind of the random feeling nature of this, combined with the fact that it's something that you have to spend rage on unless you have a proc of a free Maul. So like you have to have 2 procs at the same time to make this free. Otherwise it's competing with rage that you may need to spend on Ironfern just to stay alive. This has felt underwhelming and less powerful than Elune's Chosen. Elune's Chosen, you just go into a pack, slap down your Lunar Beam, it's going to be up again before the pack is even dead because of the cooldown reduction you can get. Druid of the Claw, like, you may go into a pack and just not see a proc for the first 10 seconds, which just feels really bad. There is some potential for some really cool gameplay within the Druid of the Claw tree that I do want to talk about though. Wild Power Surge. Mangle grants feline potential. When you have 6 stacks, the next time you transform into cat form, you gain 5 combo points, and your next Ferocious Bite or Rip deals 100% increased damage for its full duration. The way that this interacts with a few of the talents on the class tree is actually pretty cool. Looking at the class tree, we have this talent here called Fluid Form. Shred and Rake can be used in any form and shift you into cat form. Mangle can be used in any form and shifts you into bear form. We don't need to worry about the Moonkin form stuff because we're not going to be playing that with Druid of the Claw. So the combination of those two talents gives us the ability to use Rake to shift into cat form and then immediately apply a 5 combo point Rip. This has huge potential in single target scenarios. In addition to that, with Wild Shape Mastery, Iron Fur and Frenzied Regen persist in cat form, and when transforming from bear form into cat form, you retain 80% of your bear form armor and health for 6 seconds, and then for 6 seconds after entering bear form, you heal for 10% of the damage taken over 8 seconds. This provides a gameplay loop where you can build up power in bear form where you are safe by using your Mangle, which you want to hit on cooldown anyway, and then spend that power by transforming into cat form, providing a layer of security. You're still going to be more vulnerable in cat form than you are in bear form, obviously, at all times, but you have the opportunity to get a couple of abilities off, and then you can shift back into bear form. So the way this gameplay loop would kind of work is you build up your 6 stacks of Wild Power Surge by using Mangle, and then you use Rake to shift into cat form, use 1 global cooldown on Rip, and then use Mangle to shift back into bear form. This is actually pretty fun in practice and does have a lot of power, especially on boss fights. You can usually find a spot on a boss fight where you're going to be safe in cat form for 2 seconds, especially if you're able to maintain 80% of your bear form's armor and health, and all of the Iron Furs, and a Frenzied Regen if you're running that. You can usually find a spot every, 25 to 30 seconds or so where you can safely do that, even in Mythic Plus keys, even on tyrannical bosses. I think there is a lot of potential gameplay in Druid of the Claw. I do think this is just a more dangerous playstyle, and the fact that the core mechanic of the tree in Ravage is something that you really have no control over whether you're even going to be allowed to use it or not, that makes it feel not as fun. And when you compare this to the alternative that you have in Elune's Chosen, which just gives you a ton of baseline power and damage and leech in bear form without having to bother shapeshifting, I think Elune's Chosen is going to be the pick most of the time, especially in Mythic Plus content. Now, I think when you're raiding and you're in a boss, which, what boss doesn't have a tank swap these days at some point in the fight? If that's what you're doing, then like having this power to shift into cat form for extended periods of the fight is actually really, really cool, and I think has a lot of fun and high damage pushing potential. But the one that I've had the most fun with in Mythic Plus testing, at least, has been Elune's Chosen, and honestly, like, the Arcane Bear feels really, really fun to play. Moving on, let's talk about the tier set. This is another one of those kind of really boring Season 1 tier sets. The 2 set bonus is Thrash and Moonfire, increase your damage done and reduce the damage you take by 1% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. You're not really going to have any problems getting this up to 3 stacks fairly quickly, and then maintaining it at 3 stacks for the duration of whatever combat you're in. But it's just 3% damage done and damage reduction. So there's nothing exciting here. This is really boring. I feel like a lot of these 3% bonuses, like, there wouldn't be any real harm in making them 5% bonuses, and it would just make them feel a little more satisfying and exciting to get our hands on. 3% just, like, it just doesn't even feel like it's impactful. The 4 set arcane damage you deal is increased by 5%, and bleed damage you deal is increased by 5%. This kind of plays into both of the builds. You do get some bleed damage out of the Druid of the Claw build. You get arcane damage, obviously, out of the Chosen of Elune build. So, just having another 5% damage is fine, but it's really boring, and this doesn't impact all of your damage, right? Mangle is just physical damage. Your auto attacks are just physical damage. So your swipe is just physical damage. If you proc Thorns of Iron, if you're running that as a talent, it's just physical damage. Even in a full-on Arcane build, this is not going to be a huge portion of extra damage. It's just 5%, and it feels pretty boring, honestly. I think the tier set is very underwhelming, and I understand Blizzard wants a lot of the power to be in the hero talents and not in the tier set, but I feel like they could have made this 10% and it wouldn't be too powerful. It certainly wouldn't be so powerful that we wouldn't replace it with a good Season 2 tier set bonus, but maybe they don't want that pressure to have to create a good tier set bonus. I don't know where they're really coming from on these. I think almost all of the tier sets for tanks are disappointing and underwhelming, with the exception of Brewmaster Monk. The Druid one is no different. I feel like I've said a lot of negative things about Guardian Druid, and yet at the end of the day, this is still a very fun and satisfying tank spec to play for me. I have always liked playing Guardian Druid, especially in a scenario where I'm learning new content. I think the generally simplified toolkit that the class has compared to some of the other tanks, while also having a decent baseline level of tankiness compared to the baseline level that some other tanks have, makes it a really good tank for learning new content on, and a really good tank for learning how to tank on. This is kind of the same old bear that we've always had and that many of us love to play. It doesn't feel as fun to play for as long as some other tanks do, sure, but overall, I like Guardian. And at the end of the day, even though I have a lot of complaints about the state of the talent trees and a lot of potential disappointments about some of the hero talents, I think Guardian is in a pretty good spot heading into War Within. I don't think it's going to make the cut into my top 3, but it is a class that I want to have leveled and ready to go just in case it ends up getting some changes along the way, or in case it ends up being really powerful and fun, and I just want to spend some time on it in a season. Let me know what you think about Guardian Druid. Let me know if you disagree with anything that I've said. And if you made it this far in the video and you like it, please give the video a like, give it a thumbs up, and give the channel a sub. It really helps us out. And catch me on stream. I'm still streaming pretty frequently these days, and I'm going to be continuing to do testing on other tanks and in all the dungeons heading into War Within. And I hope to see you in future content. Until then, farewell.